All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Mark Dorley, and for the last 20 years, I've had the honor of serving as the director of the ethics program in the College of Arts and Sciences. And today we're celebrating our 25th anniversary. It just occurred to me that the first page on this slideshow, which is also going to be showing over at the Villanova room during dinner. So there's a lot of the pictures are kind of funny. Brett Wilmots is in front of a whiskey barrel, which is really interesting. But anyway, you'll be able to see it. You'll be able to see it again. But I was going to turn it off, but I'm afraid that I'll screw that up, so I'm not going to do that. I'll turn it off for Darlene's talk, but the first. So welcome everyone to this 25th anniversary of the ethics program. I want to recognize my fellow chairs and directors that are here, and alumni of the ethics program who are here, advisory council members, ethics board judges, and I want to especially call out Professor Jack Duty, who flew in all the way from Arizona. So thanks, Jack, for being here. Jack hired me almost 30 years ago, so I'm glad you're here. I also want to welcome back so many of the faculty who spent some time with us here as Catherine of Siena Fellows. I'm so very happy to have you with us. Thank you for coming. And it just occurred to me, Brett says we should have had name tags, or no, it was actually Jill suggested. We should have had name tags with the years you were here, but I'm sure you'll figure that out as you're talking to each other. So we gather today to celebrate 25 years of ethics at Villanova. Ethics in the classroom, ethics in extracurricular activities, ethics in hallway discussions, and in faculty-student meetings. I have a special vantage point on this celebration because I've been intimately involved in all 25 of these years. And I'm humbled to have had the opportunity to serve as the director of the ethics program for 20 years. As you perhaps have seen, if you were paying attention to the video presentation that has been going on in the background here, there have been 18 faculty who have served in postdoctoral fellow positions in ethics since 1999. As I noted, many have traveled to be with us today, and others have remained here at Villanova after completing their postdocs. We've taught around 42,000 students in our signature course, Ethics 2050, since the fall of 1999. That's a lot of students. We've graduated 174 students with an ethics minor or concentration. We've hosted many scholars for lectures, sponsored an intercollegiate ethics bowl team for 25 years, hosted a regional high school ethics bowl, a competition for 12 years, and celebrated the scholarship of our students every Parents' Weekend since the fall of 2000. We've held conferences and symposia, hosted dinners, developed an outstanding advisory council, created the Praxis Award in Professional Ethics that is now a signature Villanova event. We've created 2 undergraduate fellowships in ethics, and we sponsor an $8,000 faculty grant for scholarship around themes related to the common good in the 21st century. And we've worked with collaborators all over the campus to advance conversations about the good life, both in professional contexts and in the everyday of our lives. It's a testament to the quality of the faculty and staff who have constituted the ethics program over 25 years that we can today, with gratitude, celebrate all the good work that has been accomplished and imagine what the future has in store. I'd like to invite Professor Pat Magidi, provost of the university, to say a few words.
Thank you, Mark. As director, you've certainly had an impact on the entire generation of Villanovans, both students and faculty, and others, I would say. I've been appreciative of getting to know you and have you as a friend myself. So congratulations on tonight's honor. In particular, I would like to also congratulate Barbara Wall, Sarah Vaughn, Father Ellis, who unfortunately can't be here, for all of the work in creating and sustaining this program. And I would also congratulate you. At Villanova, our educational experience is guided and rooted in our Augustinian Catholic values. These values serve as a guidepost for our community, encouraging us to think critically, solve problems, act compassionately, and succeed while serving others. Our students leave Villanova prepared to be ethical leaders who have the knowledge and courage to approach complex, often challenging issues. The ethics program and its distinguished faculty have been central to this endeavor, and their work has shaped the intellectual and moral education of our students. Villanovans contemplate what it means to live well as human beings in the world and in relationship with others. Students learn to ask the tough questions of themselves and of others and to seek justice in the world. They do this in a respectful and supportive environment, carefully shaped by our faculty, that makes civil discussion and inquiry both possible and productive. It is not easy work, but I can't think of any week where it's better and more salient than it is right now about how important it is for our students and for our society. Today, I commend each and every person who has contributed and been part of the success of this program. Villanova is a better place because of you. Congratulations. Sorry, that's probably my mom calling me. I heard you were going to be talking tonight in front of a group. Congratulations and thank you. Thank you for the honor of being able to greet everyone here tonight. And please enjoy the evening. Thanks.
I realized I should have pulled the plug on this. Okay, so thank you, Pat. So today we want to honor some amazing people. One had the vision to support the creation of this program. One had the organizational know-how and commitment to make sure it came to fruition. And the third took the helm as the inaugural director and set the tone for the work that continues to this day. First, I want to honor Father Cale Ellis, OSA. He can't be with us. He's not feeling well today. He served as the Dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences for a very long time, and he was the Dean in 1999 when the ethics program began. It was his vision and support that propelled the idea, first, for an interdisciplinary ethics course as part of the core curriculum, and second, an ethics program to offer that course. He pushed them from ideas to reality. From day one, Father Ellis has been one of our biggest champions, and when the dean is on your side, that's pretty good. Father Ellis, if he was here, I'd offer him, we have a token of our deep appreciation of his support for us and his role that he played in its founding, and we hope it reminds him of the critical role that he played. Secondly, we want to honor Dr. Barbara Wall, Professor Emeritus of Philosophy here at Villanova. Dr. Wall was an associate dean in Father Ellis's office in the fall of 1999. And for some years before, she had been responsible for staffing the Ethics 2050 course, then required of all College of Arts and Science students. She saw the possibilities for a freestanding academic unit that would take responsibility for that course. She did her due diligence to make sure all administrative hoops were cleared for the creation of the ethics program in the fall of 1999. It was her idea to hire 2 postdocs to help staff those courses. I was the first one she hired. So thank you, Barbara. In any event, from the beginning to this day, regardless of the various roles she has played at the university until her recent retirement, Dr. Wall has been and remains an ardent champion of this program. We honor you today with a small token of our deep appreciation for the significant work you did to set the foundation for what we celebrate today. So if you could come up, I want to... So this says, Barbara Wall, PhD, in sincere appreciation for your significant contributions to the founding of the ethics program on the 25th anniversary, November 8th, 2024. other person we're going to honor, Dr. Sarah von Brakeman, professor of philosophy here at Villanova, served as the inaugural director of the ethics program. She was tasked with picking up the significant work that Dr. Wall had accomplished and creating a vibrant intellectual center for ongoing reflection on the good life. She had 2 postdocs to mentor. She created the Undergraduate Ethics Symposium to celebrate student scholarship. She created a lecture series that very first year, and she introduced Villanova students to the Intercollegiate Ethics Bowl team, where her mantra was to win big, but in the most ethical way. I sometimes dream about that, but anyway, no. She fleshed out the ethics concentration, which we offered at the time, and worked to create a community of students interested in ethics. What has transpired since her leadership was possible in large part due to the foundational ethos that she created in the program. Dr. Brakeman stepped down from the director role but never lost interest in our work and is available for counsel and for celebration. Out of deep respect for the work you have done, Sarah Vaughn, and continue to do in support of this program, we offer you this token of our appreciation.
So it reads, Sarah von Brakeman, PhD, in sincere appreciation for your inaugural leadership of the ethics program as director on the 25th anniversary, November 8th, 2024.
Okay, so thank you all again for being here, and I'm going to turn this over to Brett Wilmot, the Associate Director of the Ethics Program, who's going to introduce our keynote speaker.
My goodness, the room is full, isn't it? It's so good to have everyone here this evening to join us. As Mark said, my name is Brett Wilmot. I'm the Associate Director of the Ethics Program, and it's great to have so many friends of the program gathered to celebrate our 25th anniversary. To see so many of our Catherine of Siena Fellows, past and present, all together is truly a blessing. It is so good to see all of you. I'm so very happy to have this opportunity to introduce our speaker this afternoon, a dear friend of mine, Dr. Darlene Weaver, professor and provost at the University of Dayton in Ohio. I have been friends with Darlene for nearly 30 years, first as graduate students together at the University of Chicago and then as colleagues here at Villanova before she moved onward and upward in what has been a stellar career. I was laughing with her earlier. We're truly blessed that our friendship began in a time before social media and before cameras were on every device. So all the stories of graduate school will have to dribble out later at dinner. She has graciously agreed to present her reflections on moral complexity and the good life, and so exemplify for us today the kind of intellectual work we hope to pursue with our students and in our scholarship. In addition to having authored numerous academic articles in the fields of religious and theological ethics, she is also the author of 2 monographs, Self-Love and Christian Ethics, and The Acting Person and the Christian Moral Life. In addition, she co-edited a volume on the ethics of embryo adoption in the Catholic tradition with our own Dr. Sarah von Brakeman, again, the first director of the ethics program. At the end of their talk, we hope there'll be a little bit of time for Q&A with the audience, so please, we encourage you to participate in that and to stick around for that. Afterward, I hope you'll all stick around. Now, please join me in giving a warm and enthusiastic Villanova welcome to Dr. Darlene Weaver.
Having some flashbacks being in this room again. There were no phones when we were graduate students together, but for those of you who have only known Brett with no hair here and lots here, I used to sit behind him in class, and he had long curly hair, long hair that curled under in a bob, just like mine. And I used to think, who is that guy? It's so lovely to be back here and to see so many treasured colleagues. And I want to thank Mark for inviting me, as well as Dean Lindemeyer and Provost Majidi and President Donahue for their long support of the ethics program. And thanks to all of you for attending, and especially you students, because I'm guessing that there's some sort of extra credit you're going to earn, or an assignment that you have to write up. So you just wave your hands if you need me to slow down or clarify something. I spent 11 years here at Villanova, during which I taught Ethics 2050 virtually every semester. I didn't go back and look. It may truly have been every semester. I was on the committee that helped redesign the course some 2 decades ago, shifting it from one that was focused on ethical traditions and moral controversies to one engaged with eudaimonistic ethics. Students, do you know what eudaimonistic ethics means? Right? Oh, you're nodding, that's so great. And the fundamental questions of what it means to live a good life, which is frankly more reflective of Villanova's mission and identity as a Catholic and Augustinian university. I believe then, and I believe now, that this focus is more useful for our students. Ethics 2050 introduces students to a vision of the good life, a life well lived, grounded in and informed by a Catholic worldview, in which claims about what comprises the good life are assessed in terms of their correspondence with an objective moral order. The hope is that by acquainting students with traditions of thought about the good life, we can attract their hearts and minds and support and strengthen their ethical reasoning, preparing them for lives in which they thrive, not because of the external trappings of those lives, but because they have come to love what is good and to align their actions and relationships accordingly. I did not encounter the study of ethics until I was pursuing a master's degree, because I didn't go to a Catholic university for a bachelor's degree, so boo on me. And that class looked at the tensions between the Christian ethical obligation of universal love for our neighbors and our preferential loves, so our loves for our spouse, our children, our parents, our friends. Let's not forget that we also happen to prefer those who simply look and think and act like we do. So right out of the gate, what attracted me to the study of ethics was the opportunity to think about basic moral complexities in human life. And that's what I want to explore with you this afternoon. So when I speak about moral complexity, what I mean, right, are 3 aspects of human life. Ready, students? This is the framework for your written response. 1, the inevitable moral muddle we all experience and cannot fully escape during our lives on earth. 2, the messy interdependence that situates and shapes our lives, the ways that we impinge on and involve one another in our moral lives for better or worse. And 3, the fact of moral diversity and the corresponding challenges that it presents for us as individuals and as communities. So first, a brief word about moral complexity in human nature. Any and every Ethics 2050 class engages students in critical thinking about the kinds of creatures we are, because we cannot understand what it means to live a good life or evaluate someone's picture of a good life without drawing on beliefs about being human. Catholic moral tradition articulates a substantive view of the human person as an embodied and ensouled creature, irreducibly social in nature, yet also endowed with freedom and reason, and therefore responsible for ourselves. Creatures whose perfection and happiness lie in the knowledge and love of God in communion with others. As Lisa Cahill and others have argued, the Aristotelian Thomistic tradition affirms our commonality as human persons. Our humanity appears in bodily, intellectual, and social capacities and in shared experiences. Now, these will vary across individuals and cultural inflections. Nevertheless, shared experiences of goods and evils, of agency and vulnerability, of aspiration and failure, provides structure for some basic moral understanding and consensus between persons and communities. The interrelationship among our freedom, our shared humanity, our dignity as persons created in the image of God means that human self-determination through the exercise of our own freedom unfolds in a world that is already morally significant. We are not acting in a plastic, malleable void into which we impose moral meaning. We are acting persons living in an ineluctably moral world, one that is furnished, right, by creation, and in which we have common experiences that then begin to fund our shared moral understandings despite differences between us. Human freedom, therefore, has to be distinguished from what Pope Francis calls an illusion we are peddled, which would have us believe that we inhabit a moral reality we are constructing from zero. True freedom lies in choices ordered to the good. Says Pope Francis, the more one does good, the freer one becomes. There is no true freedom except in the service of what is good and just. The choice to disobey and do evil is an abuse of freedom and leads to, quote, the slavery of sin. Similarly, according to Gaudium et Spes, the human person cultivates a manner of life that is consistent with their dignity as they develop a propensity for the spontaneous choice of what is good. So to sum that up, right, the good life consists in a life in which we freely and spontaneously choose what is truly good. So note that the magisterial sources I just quoted tend to define human freedom as a power to choose. They accentuate freedom as a capacity that is exercised episodically in situations in which an agent has the ability to do otherwise. I could do that, but I'm going to do this instead. Now, there are other resources and thinkers in Catholic theology who understand freedom a little differently. St. Paul and St. Augustine, I'm disappointed you didn't all clap when I said St. Augustine. Thank you. Now, they highlighted dimensions of freedom as an evaluative orientation or a disorientation, as the case may be. Both St. Paul and St. Augustine grappled with the experience of a divided will, capturing the conflictual loves, the concupiscence, the experience of internal division or alienation that can mark our moral lives. This is why St. Paul laments that the good he wants to do is not what he chooses to do, why Augustine stole fruit he didn't really want or enjoy, right? Why we probably every single day do things we wish we wouldn't do or fail to do things we wish we really would. The point to underscore here is that while we as free and responsible human beings possess a power to determine ourselves through our choices, and while we have a common humanity that provides us with the markings of a shared moral landscape, we're also finite and conflicted creatures, sometimes simply mistaken or confused about the good, sometimes knowing what is in fact good, but knowingly and willingly, if also inexplicably, choosing counterfeit goods. Our moral lives are muddled, and we are mixed bags, all of us, such that the diverse ways of life we pursue are evidence not necessarily of a departure from our common humanity, but the fact that we share it. Okay, so moral complexity and human interdependence. To say that we are mixed bags could mean that we're fallible and slightly comic and slightly tragic teachers who, like Eleanor Shellstrop in the TV show The Good Place, deserve neither to spend the afterlife in the good place or the bad place, but some sort of medium place, which is probably more like Pittsburgh than, right? Our muddle is more serious, however, as the discourse of sin captures. Now, I know that talk of sin can be weaponized against already vulnerable populations and used cruelly. It may be off-putting to the religiously disaffiliated or exacerbate internal divisions or shame that people are experiencing. And while it's important to remain cognizant of these challenges, the language of sin is nonetheless a useful resource for reckoning with human agency and the malformation of the world. It can actually invite us into honest consideration of our identities as people who are forgiven by God. So in and through the exercise of our freedom, we respond to God's invitation to share in the divine life through grace. Sin is therefore fundamentally relational, rather than consisting solely in the discrete choice of actions or objects, right? So if you partake in the sacrament of reconciliation, you tend to list your sins as though sin is simply, I did this and I did that, and just these discrete choices. But sin is actually really about a disruption in our proper relationships with God and with others and with ourselves. Sin impacts not only our freedom, but also our reason and our appetites. It affects a confusion about reality. It interferes with our capacity to apprehend, to articulate, and to apply objective moral knowledge, making it harder to come to valid moral judgments across differences, while also manifesting itself as hypocrisy, excessive and bitter recrimination, and apathy. Because sin is the disruption of proper relationship with God, self, and others, it affects a confusion that distorts our reason, our affections, and our will. That is, it distorts the very springs, right, the very sources of our moral agency. So accordingly, grace, so if that's what sin does to us, right, essentially disorients, right, and malforms our agency before we've even acted, rather than being the thing that we're in like neutral, like driving a stick shift, which I've never successfully learned how to do, right? And then you put it in gear and then you choose something. That's not the way sin works, right? It's more like an automatic. I can't believe I just said that. I don't know where that came from. So grace is similar. Grace draws us into an alternative economy of relationships, repairing our agency and allowing us to recognize sin as such. Grace is our participation in God's own life, which liberates us from the pathologies of sin and makes genuine freedom possible. So that's why a Catholic conception of human freedom affirms that we're only truly free when our choices align with the truth. Now, even though sin and grace are these dynamics within which our being agents, our being free and our being responsible, right, even arise in the first place, neither sin nor grace obliterates our responsibility. Within the dynamics of sin and grace, we remain responsible for our choices. Indeed, they explain aspects of freedom that are elided or unintelligible when we are thinking instead of freedom simply as autonomy. Accounts of freedom that emphasize discrete choices we make when we have the ability to have done otherwise can neglect the pervasiveness of sin and elicit responses to other people's moral choices that focus more on blame than on compassion. They can neglect the operation of grace as our gradual reformation into new relational possibilities, including ways of being in community with others that can actually wind up subverting some of the very moral norms and moral distinctions, right, that we were making in the first place. So it's worth asking ourselves, what kind of people and what kind of communities do we need to become, not only to talk about sin and the harm we cause as sinners, but to do that in ways that can also be experiences of grace, to build community instead of dividing ourselves, to do justice, but also mercy. The thing to note about sin and grace is that both underscore how irreducibly social human persons are and how profound our interdependence is. So consider this. The exercise of our freedom is part of our dignity as human persons who are created in the image of God. It's from God, and it finds its end in God. Freedom is essential to our distinctiveness as creatures and to our individuals. No one can exercise our freedom for us. Freedom is a gift, it's a burden, it's a capacity we have, and it's also who we are in the totality of our lives. And because freedom is not so much something that we have rather than who we are, and because it's through the exercise of our freedom that each of us says our yes or our no to God, the respect that we owe to other persons on account of their dignity is also going to include respect for their freedom. So put differently, other persons comprise constraints on our own freedom. We cannot treat them in ways that objectify or instrumentalize them or that restrict their freedoms unduly. Respecting their freedom doesn't mean, or does not mean, reserving all judgment about their choices or refraining from sanctioning their behavior. It does mean our own freedom is, is not only integrally related to the truth, but it also demands responsibility towards our neighbors. However personal human freedom is, it is thoroughly social. It unfolds and operates in a social world that impinges on us for better or worse. Each person's freedom is situated within the specificity of history and culture and amidst social structures. The social situation of freedom makes some choices available to us and forecloses others. The social situation of freedom can be hospitable to our aspirations and our purposes, or it can confront us with tragic choices and morally injurious circumstances. Our social situation can assist our growth in a manner of life that is consistent with our dignity, right? It can make living the good life easier, or it can keep us perniciously vulnerable to the hostility, the suspicion, and the condescension of others. The sociality and interdependence of our freedom should chasten the judgments that we make, right? About our own actions, about others' actions and choices. It should chasten our judgments about responsibility and blame and praise. There is in ethics a robust body of scholarship that advances our understanding of the impact that social structures have on human agency, and then also help us to think in that light about pressing social issues. Literature from the social sciences also informs our thinking about freedom and responsibility within choice architectures, across generations, and in contexts of global interdependence. Much of this literature raises more questions than we're going to be able to answer this afternoon, but it is actually really helpful in setting some contexts that help us to criticize and get some distance from an account of freedom that overemphasizes our ability to have done otherwise. So these insights give the lie to such a picture of freedom as a default state of neutrality that we only exercise in neatly demarcated courses of action. Freedom instead can only meaningfully be exercised within a given context and an array of constraints. And given our mutual interdependence, the integral connection between my free pursuit of human flourishing in a life ordered to the good necessarily includes the use of my freedom in ways that promote that same flourishing in others. Put differently, my pursuit of the good life is yoked to responsibility to, for, and with others, such that this dynamic of freedom and responsibility lies at the very heart of what it means to live a good life. Okay, so part 3, moral complexity and moral diversity. So the third aspect of moral complexity I want to highlight is the fact of moral diversity. There is no good life without the skills necessary for navigating a morally diverse world. By moral diversity, I simply mean the fact of divergent and competing moralities, such as differences over the kind of life one claims is worth living, the kind of person it is good to be, and the moral duties and obligations we have. What things are permitted to us? Who is worth emulating? What and who are considered wrong and why? Moral diversity includes not only the fact of our disagreements in response to such questions, but also the plurality of ways of life, which our conceptions of goodness too often fail to convey. Moral diversity involves differences and disagreements that can be distinctively challenging. They can evoke sentiments of anger, indignation, resentment, disgust, fear, and apathy. They can involve experiences of indifference, harm, victimization, and betrayal. Moral differences can call into question our fundamental beliefs and values, our very sense of self and of others. Some moral differences and disagreements may be unimportant, but many of them are painful, confusing, and frustrating. And their impact, whether that's direct or collateral, can play out across human domains and generations. How should we respond to people who are moral others. Instances of moral diversity may involve some overt action of yours upon me, a moral position of yours I find objectionable, or one of us finding fault with the other regarding the kind of person we're becoming or the manner of life we're living. Whatever the case, one's decision about what to make of instances of moral diversity is always also a decision about one's own moral commitments, a decision about how we will relate to others. Exposure to different ways of life and growing acceptance of behavior that was previously deemed morally unacceptable, and the sheer complexity of contemporary life can make it difficult to know whether some character trait, action, or facet of social life is morally deficient. Many factors, including shifting moral norms, social networking, and coarsened social discourse, facilitate public pronouncements of moral judgment. It is easy to express outrage without knowing all the facts of a situation or any of the persons involved, to denounce lifestyles different from one's own, to shore up one's own identity by embracing a normative self-conception, an idea of oneself, right, as a moral person, that's essentially in opposition to the moral identity and attributes of others. More precisely, though we may suspect that something is wrong, it may be hard to give an intelligent and persuasive account of why it is so. How do we speak about moral failure in ways that serve human flourishing, that are not prey to sanctimony or myopic hubris? How do we fashion lives that resist what is evil, that contribute to the common good, and that affirm moral diversity on the whole as a good thing? Moral diversity is nothing new, but it's particularly challenging in the cultural moment we now face. We have precious few models for navigating it well. Yet we cannot fashion a just, peaceful, and humane life together without practices of moral correction and denunciation. Yet we also need to learn to do so in ways that are themselves aligned with the human good, respecting and protecting others' freedom without ceding all contested questions to subjectivism, and forging effective partnerships to resist grave wrongs and transform unjust social conditions. In short, we need to learn what it means and how to fashion a truly good life in a world with diverse and seemingly incommensurable visions of the good life. We need to learn how to practice one work of mercy, which is fraternal correction, and another work of mercy, which is forbearance with the faults of others. How do we live within that tension? Moral diversity poses many challenges and opportunities with regard to our responsibility to, with, and for others. It may appear altogether threatening, as though being confronted with the moral choices and positions and lives of people who differ from ours regularly places us in the occasion of sin or represents the moral decline of our society. The Catholic moral tradition provides some resources that can help us in thinking about our responsibility, right, in relation to the lives and the actions of others when we have some suspicion that what they are doing is wrong. One such response is church teaching about cooperation with evil. Catholic tradition distinguishes between formal and material cooperation with evil. Formal cooperation refers to occasions when one person directly enables, permits, or even requires another's wrongdoing. And material cooperation refers to ways one may assist another's wrongdoing. These forms of cooperation can be more or less proximate, more direct, right, or indirect. And then degrees of culpability. How culpable, how blameworthy am I for having cooperated with your wrongdoing, right, would depend on how we would suss out those dimensions. The point is that Catholic teaching about cooperation with evil draws our attention to considering the ways we can facilitate other sins, to the ways that we find ourselves implicated in sinful dynamics and systems that we didn't create and that we have limited power to affect. Concerns about cooperation with evil are important and useful in reckoning with our own or others' responsibility, and in deliberation about our personal responsibility in relation to systems or institutions. My son and I have a recurring argument in which he asks me, why won't I buy a Tesla? And I say, because I don't want to put more money in Elon Musk's pocket. And then he says, but you subscribe to Amazon Prime, right? Right? So like, why? Why will I not do the one thing and I won't do the other? And how do I think about my implication in the lives of people, right, who I don't respect? When am I willing to make those trade-offs and get my hands dirty? There's also Catholic teaching about scandal, which underscores the earlier observation I made that responsibility toward others morally constrains the exercise of our freedom. St. Paul states in his letter to the Romans that even when something may be lawful, we may have an overriding moral obligation to curtail or forgo our freedom to do it for the sake of our neighbors. And Catholic teaching about scandal develops this insight. In that teaching, scandal refers to an attitude or behavior which leads another to do evil. The crux of scandal is not really about another's emotive reaction to my scandalous attitude or behavior, whether that reaction consists in indignation or outrage or titillation or disgust or other negative emotions. Scandal is actually about the impact I have in terms of influencing my neighbor to sin. So importantly, I can cause scandal through my overt actions. I can cause it through my attitudes. I can cause it through my omissions, right? By failing to act. I can influence another to sin in all of these ways. As the Catholic sex abuse crisis made abundantly clear, institutions and cultures can cause scandal as well. Catholic teaching regarding cooperation with evil and scandal are valuable resources that bring badly needed nuance to understanding the bounds of moral responsibility, our human solidarity in sin, and the meaning of freedom in a tradition that treats human sociality with such deep seriousness. These teachings link freedom to responsibility to others, and in doing so, push us to consider with free eyes what it means to love our neighbors and what responsibilities we have to cultivate the common good. Nevertheless, concerns about cooperation and scandal are sometimes invoked in ways that can truncate our responses to moral diversity and complexity. And in doing so, we can stop short of examining our blind spots, our bias, institutional shortcomings, and social dynamics that inhibit us from growing further in grace. We can wind up deploying concerns about scandal and cooperation selectively to serve our own agendas, and we can hide behind them rather than do the hard work of formation and accompaniment. We would do well to ask whether Catholic teaching about cooperation and scandal are adequate for navigating a morally diverse world. We need additional resources that serve moral reflection on aspects of living in community, such as tools for thinking about the ethics of compromise, selective cooperation with partners on issues where we are able to agree, what respect for others' conscience means operationally in our social and organizational relations, about the prioritization of moral commitments in cases of conflict, and so forth. Catholic teaching about cooperation with evil and scandal tend to privilege protective stances in the face of moral diversity, prioritizing the appearance of moral clarity and consistency, and forgoing opportunities to work through new ways of being in community and new depths of conscience formation. Now, to be clear, we should all avoid evil and we should refrain from inducing others to sin. I'm not saying otherwise. But the fact is we are all already sinners and our hands are already dirty. So how might we respond to the challenges and the opportunities that moral diversity entails were we to decenter strategies that are built around preserving our liberty in a world that we characterize as hostile to our moral commitments, or by allowing our fear of confusion to take precedence over the difficult and messy work of formation? The freedom that can be found in allowing ourselves to be wrong or to have dirty hands is also the freedom to relinquish the anxious maintenance of our goodness, a goodness that's a mirage in the first place. Being wrong, whether that means we're simply mistaken, being judged as at fault even when we're not, which provosts, by the way, know a lot about, or being fully culpable for some moral failure does not automatically or inevitably bring about our freedom. Rather, reckoning honestly with our moral failure and with our humility in the face of moral others is an experience of grace. So rather than punt, right, when we face moral diversity, we ought to be asking ourselves how we can better equip ourselves and others to face it well. That effort is what Elizabeth Sweeney Block calls the labor of conscience, and it is work that needs to transpire both individually and communally. So I'm making my way towards a conclusion, and I'm going to do that by connecting these thoughts on moral complexity and ethics education. The labor of conscience is indeed work we're obliged to take up in earnest and over our lifetimes. Moral diversity encompasses different kinds of disagreements, deliberations about normative commitments and practical dilemmas, decisions about how to respond to others' actions and behaviors when these are contrary to our own commitments, and choices about what values to prioritize, when, and why. We are called to approach this work with care, compassion, curiosity, and courage. Recent scholarship on the ethics of the church and on university ethics is encouraging, but as a church and as educators, we can do better. In parishes and in church-affiliated organizations, and especially in colleges and universities, we should focus more intentionally on the practice of ethical reasoning than is often the case. So notice I didn't say ethical traditions and moral controversies, and I didn't even really say the good life, right? But the practice of moral reasoning as a skill, as a transferable, portable skill that our students can take with them. Right? We should approach ethics education in ways that assist students in the moral appraisal of specific differences and disagreements, in the evaluation of salient circumstances that might shift that appraisal or mitigate culpability, that help them distinguish diversity that appears within a range of morally appropriate choices from moral actions that are well-intentioned but misguided, and then these from moral actions that are just wrong, full stop. I think too often we tend to think it's just one or the other, right? Rather than that entire continuum. So we should equip our students and others with questions, tools, and patterns of ethical reasoning that are necessary to critical examination of moral claims and for grappling with substantive claims about reality. We can make our work in our curricula and our pedagogies more visible. We can craft courses that focus very intentionally on teaching students how to reason ethically. We can advance scholarship on these issues, including scholarship on teaching and learning. And we can continue to share practices from communities and disciplines that do it well. We can shape reflection in our own parishes and communities about the kind of leadership we want and the kind of community we want to become. We can practice at accompaniment and inclusion, at balancing charity and justice, and we can fail, and then we can try again. I suspect that one reason why the Catholic Church tends to respond to moral diversity with concerns about scandalizing others or with concerns about cooperation with evil is that because in our church communities, we have not done the work of building a culture that can tolerate nuance, and we have not formed leaders who can guide such change. There are two virtues that are particularly important to a life well lived in a morally diverse world, and those are forbearance and fortitude. James Calvin Douglas argues that in the exercise of forbearance, we insist on the maintenance of community even with those we perceive to be in error. Through forbearance, we may not only improve the health of our common life together as church, we may also seize a chance to witness to the world an alternative way to navigate difference by demonstrating the power potential in forbearance as a set of transferable skills that our political culture desperately needs. Those were his words, not mine. In the face of moral diversity, we must cultivate forbearance. Now, forbearance differs from tolerance, and it's not the same thing as being non-judgmental. As the philosopher Gary Watson asks, what would never judging or accepting people exactly as they are even come to? And why would those stances be desirable? If never to judge means suspending our critical intelligence or not holding one another morally answerable, then non-judgmentalism writ large amounts to nihilism, complacency, or a loss of moral nerve. Again, but those were his words, not mine. Watson argues that standing in judgment can go wrong either through failures of interpretive generosity, so being like too ready, too quick to attribute fault in the first place, or being too unaccepting of others' faults. Nevertheless, moral appraisal is necessary work. If we're confronted with non-trivial instances of moral diversity, we might consider teasing apart the need for moral appraisal from the freedom that we have to choose how to regard the other, how to respond to the moral issue at hand, and how to relate to that other going forward. Making these distinctions and discerning how to live them out in practice is not easy to do for individuals, much less for communities. The virtue of forbearance prioritizes efforts to maintain community while holding ourselves and others accountable. Must we practice forbearance with everyone, you may ask? What about abusers? What about those who deny the humanity and equality of others? It's important to note that forbearance is not a blank check, nor is the practice of forbearance undifferentiated across a community. There may well be instances where a community practices forbearance on behalf of a member who cannot reasonably be asked to do so given specific circumstances, or instances when an individual member finds a way to offer forbearance on behalf of a community as a whole. So examples that come to mind include the forgiveness practiced by members of the Nickel Mines Amish community following the 2006 school shooting there, or Helen Prejean accompanying as a spiritual advisor convicted murderers on death row. In the face of moral diversity, we must also cultivate fortitude. Fortitude is required to stand by our values and convictions when doing so becomes costly, say because our position is unpopular or when we are speaking truth to power. Fortitude is required to admit that we may be mistaken, that our convictions may be motivated by self-interest or bias, that having the courage of our convictions can simply be window dressing for blind spots, condescension, or the maintenance of our own power and privilege. Fortitude is required for honesty about our own moral failures. And finally, fortitude is required to persist in the unresolved tensions that come with forbearance and accompaniment of others. We need it to be steadfast and forbearing while others clamor for more punitive responses and fault us for hypocrisy or for moral compromise. Moral diversity raises profound questions for living together. Even communities that are deeply committed to valuing diversity, inclusion, and respect for others must determine how to respond to violations of community norms, whether and how to sanction offenders, what differences to tolerate and celebrate. On each of these points, there will be disagreements, and more insidiously, there will be, for many of us, an attachment to our differences that makes it difficult to be open to the work that grace could accomplish in us. According to Pope Francis, the way to distinguish apparent virtue from authentic virtue is to identify whether it fosters openness and union with others. Neither openness nor union requires a false neutrality or a moral subjectivism, but it does require us to bring sufficient nuance to ethical reasoning so that we can distinguish our moral appraisal of another's action from our choice to maintain community with that other. While forbearance and fortitude need to be practiced by individuals and are particularly crucial traits for anyone entrusted with the care of a community or organization, forbearance and fortitude also depend significantly on communities and served communities. In Fratelli Tutti, Pope Francis argues that fraternity is born not only of a climate of respect for individual liberties or even of a certain administratively guaranteed equality. Fraternity necessarily calls for something greater, which in turn enhances freedom and equality. It's the work of grace, and is built through daily commitments to foster and sustain a set of virtues and practices. In this regard, fraternity is both an effect of lives well lived and a condition for them. And that's where I want to wrap up. At the end of an election week, in a place where people come together day after day to seek the truth, to live and work together, to serve the church and the world, and to prepare and launch new generations of leaders. I'm so delighted the ethics program at Villanova has thrived for 25 years, and I'm proud to have been a small part of it. And I'm confident the program will continue to play a crucial role in the formation and preparation of students who will look to create communities in which we can navigate the moral complexity of our lives with justice and mercy, with fortitude and forbearance. Thank you for your kind attention. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share some conversation with you.
I think you're capable of handling this, so.
We can manage.
We talked.
Yeah, we talked about it. We worked it out. It's okay. We figured it out. Okay. Yes, please.
Thanks for a really wonderful portrait of the ethical life. I think it's very holistic and sensitive, beautiful portrayal. I'm really intrigued by the third part. And I'd be interested in your thoughts on sort of a new emergent chord in Catholic social thought, maybe particularly Catholic political thought, which seems to me to respond to moral diversity in a curious way. So it seems like modernity unleashes diversities that realize certain kinds of freedoms for which we wouldn't want to turn back a clock. The price of that is also an increased moral diversity that characterizes modernity. It seems to me that there are trends in Catholic political thought, Patrick Deneen, our incoming vice president, who respond to that moral diversity in a very anxious way, maybe in a nostalgic way. That is, they respond to moral diversity by trying to environmentally control and minimize diversity rather than equipping agents to be discerning about how to navigate a world. Does that make sense? Do you see it?
Oh, yeah.
So what would be, how would you evaluate that sort of response to moral diversity, which seems anxious and reactionary, rather than the picture you painted of agents who are cultivated in community to be able to discern what a moral life looks like?
Yeah, for time I skipped over an example of a Catholic school that fired an unmarried teacher who became pregnant. And that to me seems to illustrate exactly that kind of reaction, right? Because the justification given is a worry that it would scandalize, that it would confuse families, children, right, neighbors, that it would invite others, to judge and condemn the school, the church at large, for failing to be faithful to values it professes. And yet that same reaction creates scandal for another population, right, who are saying, you just dismissed, right, an unwed mother who is choosing to continue, right, this pregnancy. That scandalizes me. That seems to be a betrayal of certain, moral convictions. It's a lot easier to do the first, and it's a lot harder to do the second, right? Because the second requires nuance, and the second requires courage, and the second requires forbearing with other people thinking, believing that you have copped out, that you are behaving in ways that are unfaithful to the values that you profess. So what you described is exactly what I see happening. And it's why I think, when we think about grace as relational, and when we think about grace really as a reformation of ourselves that actually allows us to be in relationship in new ways that are not otherwise possible, I think that points us in the direction of that second response, right? The messier, right, more courageous, much more complicated, and much more costly response to moral diversity.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Kind of jumping off of that and appreciating the way that you've laid out the very social, rich nature of the moral life in the Catholic view. In what respect do you see us responding in an ecological way to the moral life that is out there? I mean, I don't think we want to totally give up the idea that we do want to form
Yeah.
social understandings of justice.
Yes.
With this focus on the agent, how does that kind of equip the person to respond and maybe advocating a socially engaged way?
Yeah. I guess I'm going to answer in two ways, which is, my work really does tend to focus on, right, moral agents. And even though I always describe them as irreducibly social, it's often the case that a question will emerge, well, but wait a minute, what about social structures? And well, wait a minute, what about systemic? As though if you're thinking about ethical issues in daily life, or you're thinking about an agent grappling with the complexity, right, of their own interior lives, of the right, their relationships with others, that you're somehow not attending to systemic issues. I don't see that is the case, right? I mean, the first things are complicated precisely because we're embedded in the second. But I guess the second thing that I want to say is that I do think that it's increasingly incumbent upon us as ethics educators to focus on the skills of ethical reasoning rather than acquaintance with traditions of thought, as though that in and of itself is going to empower students to bring nuance to a morally complex world. And, when I said a moment ago, right, on the one hand, you can see moral diversity within a range of morally acceptable things, right? I mean, there's multiple moral courses of action and ways of life, right, that are morally acceptable. And the diversity in that case is, it's good. And in fact, it is a manifestation of a common humanity that we have, right, as free agents, as culturally situated agents, and so forth. And then there's, then there's that much more muddled where, well, is it wrong? Is it not wrong? Is it good? Is it not bad? And we've got to grapple with circumstances and how those mitigate our judgments. And we might be wrong, but we're doing the best that we can. And right. And then there are things that are just wrong, full stop. I'm unprepared to say that we have to forego saying that there are things that are simply wrong in order to recognize that moral diversity on the whole, right, can be good, and in order to want to say that preserving, right, that sort of middle space is important. Does that make sense? And so I think, the social work we have to do, or the ecological approach we need to take, is actually to figure out what would we need to do to form communities in which we could actually comprehend and discuss and keep all those tensions alive in the ways that we relate to each other, right? I think that would be extraordinarily hard to do, and it would actually take a more cohesive community than we really have available, right, for many of us these days, because you would need lives forged and lived together, and histories, right, together, to make sense of all of those things. And so it's that erosion, I think, of cohesive communities that poses particular challenges for us in trying to support nuance, right, in our engagement with moral others. Yeah.
One example that came to mind, it's not a question, I just wondered if you'd comment on it, but all of these comments that you've been making to him seem to make it more salient, is the family as a community. And I've recently been reading more sociological research about members of families cutting each other off over disagreements, and I think particularly of political disagreements. And that kind of fracturing families as people take moral stands to say, I'm not sitting at Thanksgiving dinner with you, given how you voted or who you support or your political views.
Yeah.
Could you comment on that and how that relates to your topic?
Well, my preferred tactic is la la la, right? I don't hear you. I mean, that's sort of the point, right? If we can't even do that in our families, how are we supposed to do it in communities? And you know, and it's difficult. I mean, Jim Keenan, right? Jesuit ethicist Jim Keenan, and I had a lunch conversation I'll never forget, because we've both written on sin, and he didn't understand why I was talking about action in relation to sin, and I didn't understand why he couldn't see that was important. And we went to lunch and we wound up talking about relatives we each had. And he said, I have a relative who's who has a substance addiction, and yet they're a good person, and that's why I want to talk about sin in these ways, right? Because he's trying to sort of exculpate, right, this person he loves. And I said, I have a relative who made choices that I saw really destroy the lives, right, of their children, and that's why I want to talk about actions and choices, that the things that we do wreak havoc and harm in the lives of others. And it was just this amazing conversation, right, where we both got this insight into each other and automatically understood what was sort of undergirding the ways that we were thinking about these matters. And so I guess I offer that by saying that, yeah, it's hard for me to sit next to certain people at Thanksgiving, and there are topics I studiously avoid when I am on the phone with particular, relatives, and right, I mean, all of these things. But that's not the whole of who they are. And, I like to think that it's important for us to try to at least hold out the hope of having a future together, even if we're pretty dim, right, about the prospects of that coming to fruition. I don't know. At least when I have my provost hat on and I do things people don't like, I think about the fact that we still need to have a future together, right, in order to be effective, right? So thanks for that question. And Thanksgiving's right around the corner, folks, so you can practice for yourselves. Yes?
So maybe following from that, I'm interested in the forbearance as a virtue, and are there like criteria that you think of that would distinguish like a legitimate exercise of forbearance from like a counterfeit, or I guess the concern lurking here is that like the bad guys will always say then, oh, you should just be more patient, like just wait for my conversion, right? And that's, so that's sort of at the extreme, but in the like the uncle who we can't stand, that sort of thing, like are there criteria for helping us to think about what is a healthy forbearance, what does that look like, and maybe where does forbearance then get distorted or co-opted or hijacked or
Good
prove
grief.
less helpful.
I can't even forbear with the way my husband folds the laundry. It's like a weekly challenge for me. He just like, I don't know how he turns it into a ball. It's a t-shirt and somehow, forbearance is not contrary to accountability. Right? So in response to the person who says, well, just wait, we can hold each other accountable, right? And we must hold each other accountable. Do we need to do that in ways that amount to estrangement and to shunning, right? And that also then just brings me back to the fact that forbearance may be differentiated across persons. If I'm the victim of someone who has abused me, I'm not going to counsel that person to forbear, right? But a community around that person, may, or a community around the abuser, right, may have opportunities to practice a forbearance that is still practiced alongside appropriate accountability. Yeah. And I think that the counterfeits start coming up when, I'm still influenced by the work of Iris Murdoch and, her description of the fat, relentless ego. So anytime our forbearance or our fortitude, right, are really start feeling pretty comforting to ourselves, then that's a pretty good, right, signal. And when our condemnation and our judgment feel pretty good, right, that's a signal that there is something we are satisfying in ourselves. Thanks for the question. Am I out of time?
Yeah, I think I was gonna.
You get the hook and drag me off? Thank you, everybody.
That's great. Okay, so I just have a quick story, because as I was listening to Darlene, I thought, wow, this is really hard work. And I had a student last semester, The Good Life is hard work. I had a student last semester, the third day of class, he raised his hand and he goes, are you saying that it's hard to be a good person? And yeah, unfortunately, yes. There's a reception outside, please help yourself. There's a bar to the far left, and then there's some food. So please enjoy each other's company.